Meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Stopta at C70. Alan Medlock's still out doing whatever an athletic director does at the high school level. Pretty much everything, I think, is what that is. Last week, we had one part of the Gashouse gang join us. We have another part tonight. Matt Pauley is joining us from KMOX. Find him at Matt Pauley on air on Twitter. Matt, how are you tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy being able to come on with you.
Yeah, it's always a good time. And how is the Gashouse gang going for y'all? It seems like it has taken off pretty well.
Yeah, it really has. It's myself, Kevin Wheeler, Tom Ackerman, and Bernie Miklas, and it's a video show that we do at 12 noon on weekdays, and then it gets into podcast form and replayed on KMOX later in the evening. But a lot of people enjoy watching it live on the video feed. And kind of my cool story, I was on Cardinal's Caravan this past weekend where I went to Marion, Evansville, Cape Girardeau, and Paducah. And the number one comment I got from people who came up to talk to me was how much they were enjoying the Gashouse gang. So
Awesome.
it seems to be making a little bit of an impact. We're about 55 or so episodes in, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're doing them every day. The episode total is going to pile up pretty quickly, isn't it? So, it's pretty incredible, and a fun thing. And I know y'all are talking more than just baseball, which is good at this time of year, and especially the way this winter has been. Yeah, I'm glad I'm going well.
Yeah, and it is baseball focused. We say that we talk Cardinals every single day. So on Monday we do nothing but Cardinals baseball. Like today, it was me and Bernie Miklas, and of the 45 or so minutes, and we kind of divvy it up into four segments. All but one of the segment was Cardinals baseball. So we are very Cardinals intensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know St. Louis has a lot of different sporting interests, but it does feel like it always comes back to the Cardinals to some degree.
Yeah, I think I see that, hosting Sports Open Line nights on KMOX. I get a lot of interaction when I'm talking about the Cardinals. And if I start talking, and this is no disrespect meant to any of the other sports properties, but if I start talking about the Blues or SLU or Mizzou or City or anything, the interaction is not the same. So it can be a cold day in January, and I think we're still going to get more people that are interested in hearing Cardinals talk than we are just about anything else.
Well, before we dive into the Cardinals talk, though, I know your history is Milwaukee. And, last week we lost Bob Uecker. I imagine being in that sports market, you have, some thoughts about the passing of Bob Uecker.
Yeah, that one was tough. It was really tough, and I've said this a bunch of times. I don't want to. I'm not trying to make myself sound like I was best friends
Mhm.
with Bob Uecker. That would be very disingenuous. But we knew each other. We worked on the same broadcast together. I did not interact with him on an everyday basis. We worked out of different booths, but we certainly did some things together and familiar with each other. And for me, it's kind of a two pronged thing. First of all, I think he has the most unique career of
Mhm.
anybody in sports
Mhm.
broadcasting when you consider he was a baseball player. He got into sports broadcasting, but he got into stand up comedy. He got into acting. He did all these things. And he was to his final day that he was with us. He was always the funniest guy in the room. And he was the most beloved and most important celebrity in Milwaukee. And in no way, shape, or form is this like a shot at like, Jack Buck or Mike Shannon or
Mhm.
anybody, just legendary great broadcasters with the Cardinals. But Milwaukee's had one guy. Like St. Louis has had a bunch of people that we beloved. Milwaukee has had one guy. It was Bob Uecker. In many ways, he was the soul of that organization. Those broadcasts are never going to be the same again. he meant more to that community than my words can even start to express.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just seeing it from afar, just not ever being involved with that, but just knowing, the fact that he had been there for so long, 50 plus years, and knowing, what Jack Buck and those meant here, you get an idea of what it was like there. Even though every relationship is going to be different, you kind of have a general feeling, and I know, yeah, it's going to be very, very hard, I would think, for Milwaukee fans. Not that the people left behind are not any good. It's just it's not the same.
It's not, and they've got a great. Jeff Levering is the guy who does a lot of radio and then does some TV. Brian Anderson, who I think is the best national baseball play-by-play going right now, especially since Joe Buck isn't doing baseball anymore. Those are the local broadcasters, in addition to some other folks who are talented. But I mean,
Mhm.
Brian Anderson and Jeff Levering are as good of baseball broadcasters walking the face of the earth. So there's a lot of really good people in Milwaukee, but it's never going to be the same without Bob Uecker there. Can I just have
Mhm.
you heard the story about the final the playoff series and what happened with him? I think it's interesting if you haven't heard it.
Go ahead and tell him.
Okay, so he didn't work many games this past year.
Mhm.
He was battling cancer. He would when he did work games, he would go get radiation during the day and sometimes come in and do a game. So we get up to the postseason, and he has full intentions of doing the playoff games there against the Mets. And he just doesn't have it in him to do the first game. Second game, he comes to the ballpark, even does the pregame interview with Brewers manager Pat Murphy. But then after that, he realized he just didn't have it in him. He stayed in the booth for most of that game. In about the seventh inning or so, he went ahead and called it a night. And that's a night that the Brewers season could have ended if they would have lost that game. They won that game. They forced a game three. And he shows up to the ballpark for that third game. Doesn't do any of the broadcast until the ninth inning. Comes on, does the ninth inning. What stinks for the Brewers is that was the inning with the Pete Alonso home run. So basically, his final call is that
Mhm.
just terrible way to lose
Yeah.
for Milwaukee. People around him knew that that was likely going to be his final time, and Jeff Levering was he was brought to tears during the post game show afterwards. Christian Yelich, when he was in the Brewers clubhouse talking to the media, he started crying and broke up a little bit when he was talking about Uke. And Uke stayed in the Brewers clubhouse after the game for an inordinate amount of time.
Mhm.
And we now know that essentially he probably knew that that was going to be it. A lot of people took note of how long he stayed in the clubhouse after the game. And I think we can look back on now and say he knew that was going to be his final time in there.
Yeah. Yeah, because it probably was getting to the point that even if he was still with us, he just wouldn't have had the strength to do.
Yeah.
And it is fortunate for the Brewers that they've been able to have this little bit of time of transition, and it's not like all of a sudden here we are, a month before opening day, and they have to figure out the radio situation. I mean, there is some continuity, but again, like we said, it's just not the same.
Will not be the same. You're correct.
So let us shift gears then and talk a little bit about the Cardinals. And it's been a very quiet winter. We talked about that quite a bit. I think we spend more time talking about what's not going on than what has gone on this winter. But last weekend was winter warm up, which does tend to at least put stories in the paper and get people talking about the Cardinals. And like you said, you got a chance to go out on the caravan and go to a few places. What did you take away from the time, not only with the players, but with outside of St. Louis fan base?
Yeah, so a couple things here. First, I think the narrative that was the most important narrative that came out of winter warm up, I thought, was the fact that they said that even if they don't trade Nolan Arenado, they don't need to cut payroll elsewhere. I thought that was
Mhm.
really important. I still think we can maybe talk about this if you want to, but I
Oh,
still
sure.
think they'll trade Arenado. I don't know how much Arenado talk you want to get into. I don't expect him to be on the team when pitchers and catchers report, but even if he is, I think the fact that they say they don't need to cut in other areas. It creates a little bit more of a sure thing in terms of what the roster is going to look like. Now, I say this and I realize like you can go to any team in all of Major League Baseball and the talking point in the middle of January is not going to be, man, this season's going to stink. We're not going to be very good.
Right.
So I get that. There's always going to be hope from every single team that it can be a good year. But man, I get the sense that this team thinks that they can be a whole lot better than anybody is giving them credit for. And the players feel that way. All the players I talk to, I think it's a genuine thing. Again, what else are they supposed to say? I know that's the other side of it, but I sense that it's real. And I also think a really important thing that it went unsaid, because it's easy for the organization when they want to sell tickets and do all these things that they want to do. You don't want to sit there and say, hey, we're going to be terrible. So they can say, hey, you know what, we think we can be competitive. We think we can be a little bit better than what people are saying out there. So that's what's being overtly said. What's not being said, which I think indicates that is a true belief and not just a talking point, is when they announced that Arenado's status would not impact payroll elsewhere. That when you mention to them, well, if you don't trade Arenado, does that mean you need to trade Ryan Helsley? Does that mean you need to trade Eric Fetty? There was almost this response of like, that's a silly question. What do you mean? Of course we're not going to trade these guys. These guys are so important to what we want to do this year. So if they are sitting here viewing a Ryan Helsley and an Eric Fetty and whoever else as being incredibly important to what they're trying to do this year, so much so that it's more important than whatever value you would get back from for them for future seasons. To me, what goes unsaid there is that they do actually believe that they can be more competitive than a lot of people in the outside world are giving them credit for.
And I think that's legitimate. I think it's also, if you want to, take the counter argument, is the Cardinals have spent a lot of time over the last few years kind of not maximizing one way or another, either not adding to payroll when, and try to, push over the top, or not, trading when they could, get some value. Ryan Helsley has more value probably on this team than anybody else. You're right. If you trade him, then obviously you're looking at a little bit of a weaker season. So I don't know. To me, I agree what you're saying, that they do believe this, and I think there's legitimate reasons to, but I think there's also a little bit still of that, trying to find that middle road that tends to not work very well in baseball.
You use the word middle, and that's the perfect word to describe where this organization has been for way too long, and they got to get out of the middle. And I think they're in the middle right now still, because they're trying to do this reset, but they're also trying to compete all at the same time. And look, I get accused of being a homer or carrying water for the team enough. Let me say this just to be clear, because while I do think that there is a possibility that they're right and this season goes a lot better than a lot of people thought it will be, there's also a very solid possibility that it doesn't. If Jordan Walker doesn't get fixed, if Nolan Gorman doesn't get fixed, 2025 can look almost closer to 2023 than 2024. And I think being similar to 2024, 83 to 87 wins, and maybe sneaking into the postseason, that's probably the ceiling for this upcoming year. But there's a deep floor as well. I don't know how many teams in Major League Baseball have as much of a wide range between the potential ceiling and the potential floor going into a season. So in no way, shape, form am I saying that for sure this team is going to overachieve and be a really good team. I just leave open the possibility of that being something that can happen. I think it's a legit possibility.
Yeah, we won't accuse you like Jim Hayes gets accused of the rights holder shuffle. We won't accuse you of that. I think you're absolutely right. But you're right. I mean, and it's not even, hey, if these guys don't produce, they're in trouble. If somebody gets hurt at the wrong position, I mean, there's some depth at places, but like a Helsley, like a Gray, when you get to that level, there's just not a lot of margin for error, which is, again, something the Cardinals have dealt with for a number of years. And no, and when you were out with the fans, I mean, I don't know how much you got a chance to just interact with the people on the Caravan, but was that optimism shared, or was there a little bit of that, show me attitude?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And one of the good things for me on going out to Caravan is you really remember who a lot of the Cardinals fans are, because in our world, we're sitting on social media all the time. And breaking news, social media can be a negative place at times. So you're always around that and inside of the market, the city of St. Louis, the direct St. Louis metro area, whether it's sports radio or something else. I think here over recent years, things have tended to go negative. And look, they haven't made the playoffs in 2 years, and they had a really, really terrible season 2 years ago. And it's been a really long time since they've had any postseason success of note. So I'm not being critical of the fans for their negative disposition, but you go out on these caravans and it's it's people who are hours away from St. Louis who are going out on a really really cold day to listen to Cardinals players and Cardinals alumni speak, and those people I think are always going to have a much more positive attitude
Mhm.
about things and be very appreciative. And I like to think that those are the people that kind of represent the larger part of the fan base. So it's a we can make the argument that social media doesn't represent the whole. Probably going to Paducah, Kentucky doesn't represent the whole either, because those people are going to view the team a little bit differently. And being able to have a bunch of Cardinals players and Cardinals alumni walk into the McCracken County Convention Center isn't something that happens very often.
Mhm.
But the people that I interacted with were positive, and I think the people at Winter Warm Up were positive as well. I was talking. John Stuper came over and did a radio interview with me on the Saturday
Mhm.
of Winter Warm Up, and we had 5 minutes or so during a commercial break before he came on, and he and I were just small talking, and it was right after the public question and answer session that he was able to do, where fans would come up and ask questions, and I asked him, how'd that go? Kind of expecting you might have faced some tough questions, and he said, it was fine. I don't think people really came at him. So the people who are showing up even at Winter Warm Up probably are not the people that want to grill John Mazalak.
Yeah, and I have noticed, and we've done Blogger Day for since 2011, and not that the bloggers have ever wanted to come in there and just pound on Mo, but there is something about being in the same room that tends to damper a little bit of of those kind of fires where you do want to phrase your question. It'd still be hard, tough question, but maybe a little bit more politely. And I think that's probably more the case. That's also the case for people that come in there, even if they thought they were going to be all tough. But I think you're right. Also, I mean, it's always cold when winter warm up comes around, and so if you're getting out to go to this, you probably are at least wanting to believe that it's going to be a good year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Mo is look. There are a lot of complaints about Mo and a lot of
Mhm.
criticisms, and many of them are warranted. I like him as a person, and I think once he's away from this job and some years go by, and we start to reflect upon his tenure, it's going to look a lot more. There's going to be more positive than negative. But one of the things is he's very good at being kind of self-deprecating and
Mhm.
reading the
Mhm.
room and things like that. He's really good in situations like those. I was at this. We did this Missouri Broadcasters Association symposium this past year, and he was the keynote speaker. And he started talking about the streaming games and specifically the Cardinals games on Friday nights on Apple.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, Cardinals fans hate those things. They hate them so much. They do not like these streaming games. And he started telling a story about how on Friday nights when the Cardinals are on Apple, his mom always calls him up and says, Johnny, I don't know how to get this game. And he ends up calling his sister and says, hey, can you go over to mom's house to show her how to get this? And it was so incredibly relatable. Like
Mhm.
that story was relatable. So people kind of look at Mo and sometimes think he comes off as arrogant or pompous or something like
Mhm.
that. And honestly, I wish more people could see that version of him, because again, I think being relatable is an important thing when you're in the any type of
Mhm.
public sphere, and we do get to see that on occasion.
Yeah, I remember it's 3 or 4 years ago now when we had a group and somebody asked a question about, getting relief help, and he was like, "You want me to go out and get a reliever?" Knowing his track record in that case. So, yeah, he knows his flaws. He knows, what is out there. And he's very, very dry individual, so it doesn't always come across. What do you think, and I know it's a little hard to tell because you just haven't had that opportunity too much yet, but how do you think things will change from your perspective, in the media relations thing when Mo leaves and Chaim Bloom takes over?
That's an interesting question. Chaim has an incredible reputation in terms of always being available to media, and I think Mo very much is the same way. Having worked in Milwaukee, and I really really respect David Stearns and think he is a fantastic baseball executive, but Stearns didn't say a thing. He talked, he was able to use a lot of words to say nothing, and his availability was not always there. And I think that is a very common instance for most high level baseball executives. So Mo has always been available when you need him or when you request him. I don't, just based off the relationships I have with people in Boston. I have heard that Heim is very much the same. So I think that the availability to the top baseball decision maker is going to stay the same. One thing I'll be curious to see is the Cardinals kind of have a one voice philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
They are restrictive on some of the members of the organization speaking on behalf of the organization. So, like, for example, if I'm going to interview Randy Flores, I can talk to him about his playing career. I can even talk to him about, drafting and development and things like that, the things that he has direct, oversight on in the organization. But what I what they part of what you're not supposed to talk to him about, and that's part of the agreement when you schedule these interviews, is he doesn't speak for the organization. So the Cardinals have always had this one voice sort of thing, and I don't know if Heim agrees with that or not. There's been some criticism of the organization recently from not making Bloom available so much here recently. I don't know for sure. The last time I talked to him was at the winter meetings, and we did not discuss this. But I have heard from some other people that I trust that a lot of that is coming from him because he doesn't want to, overstep or outshine John Mozeliak or anything. He's being deferential in a very in a way that he wants to. So again, I don't know if it's an organizational thing or if it's a Heim thing that he's not talking so much right now. But I guess that would be the one thing that I'd be curious if there's. Again, I don't. It sounds like there's the way I'm talking makes it sound like, oh, there's like this lockdown on who can talk. That's not it. They just are very selective on who they want speaking wide ranging about the organization.
Yeah, I mean, when Michael Gersh was GM, we didn't see him very often, right? I mean, he would make appearances here and there, but for the fact that he was, the GM, that you would, traditionally, I mean, granted, roles have changed, but traditionally you would expect him to be kind of the face of the front office. And that just didn't happen while he was there because, of course, John Mozeliak is still there. So that is interesting to think about, and it will be interesting to see if that changes. And I think it'll be kind of interesting to see if how much we hear from Chaim Bloom this year, right? I mean, is he going to be made available every once in a while, or is he just going to be kind of squirreled away until October 1st?
Yeah, I would guess that we don't hear a lot from him. They did allow me to do an interview, myself and Mike Claiborne. We did an interview a couple weeks ago on our countdown show with Rob Serfolio, who's the assistant general manager for player development and performance. I wasn't sure if we were going to get approval on that interview, and we did. They seemed very energetic even about us speaking with him and him getting out there a little bit. So that was really good. I enjoyed the conversation. To plug it, it's if you go to KMOX.com and go to the Cardinals Conversations podcast feed, you can go back and find it for anybody who wants to listen in. But I was so impressed by Rob Serfolio. And all I could think during it is how good this is for the Cardinals that you bring in somebody like this and you are able to give him the space to go do interviews and for Cardinals fans to get to know him a little bit.
And I think it's to their benefit for sure, especially in a winter where that's all that's happened, right? They've spent a lot of time talking about we're gonna, shore up the front office or show up player development, and they have done that with these hires. But if you don't let them, be known, then I don't think anybody gives you the credit, maybe as you if you want to put it that way, for doing that because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and the other side of that is also not the other side of it, but just one of the other angles on it is Chaim Bloom is the reason that Rob Cerfolio was hired. Not that John,
Mhm.
if John Mozeliak did not want him hired, he wouldn't have been hired. So you had to have Mo's approval. But this is somebody who's coming to the Cardinals to work for Chaim Bloom, even though he's going to work for Mo for this season. So that means, from a baseball philosophy standpoint, you can assume that Cerfolio and Bloom are very much on the same page. So if you want to start to get an idea on Bloom's baseball philosophies, the best way to do it right now, if Bloom isn't talking, is to listen to Cerfolio talk, because they're probably saying, he's probably saying much the same of what Bloom would say if you asked him those same questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right, and that's going to be very important for going forward. I mean, the Cardinals have a big draft pick this summer, and this idea of developing players is going to be something that's going to be going on for a while, and we're going to have to. I think as Cardinal fans, we're going to have to see that, blossom, and knowing where to be looking is a good thing. Um, we've talking about this team and talking about the young players on it. It does feel to me that when you talk about this team, there is a lot of optimism about the offense, if nothing else, right? I mean, a lot of young players and a lot of players that could be good, could be iffy, and it all is going to depend, as we'll start there, with whether Nolan Arenado is on the team or not. If Nolan is here and the Cardinals get off to a slow start, how much do you think he gets blamed for some of that?
I guess it probably depends on his production. That would
Mhm,
be the first thing. If he's not hitting, there's going to be some blame, because I think the blame for last year is largely connected to him and Goldschmidt and what those guys did not do. So it depends on who's producing and who's not producing.
mhm.
That's I'm not trying to be
No,
flippant about
no.
it, but that's how I would view it. And let's not forget, they've gotten off to a slow start each of the last
Mhm,
2 years. And last year in spring, they tried to blame the previous year on the World Baseball Classic. Well, there was no WBC this past
right.
year, and they still got off to a slow start. I don't. I think the Cardinals run one heck of a spring training, and I'm sure there's some tweaks and some things that can be made. But one of the things I'll ask, Ali, when we get into spring here in a couple weeks, is, do they make any changes to try to avoid the slow start to the season that they've had each of the last 2 seasons? Because to your point, if they do have a slow start to the year, I think things could, that slippery slope all of a sudden starts to get a bit steeper.
Yeah, there's not a deep reservoir of goodwill, right now because of the last 2 years,
Yeah.
and so if it is, 3rd verse, same as the first type of thing, I mean, last year they did pull out of it. They had that amazing run from Mother's Day to what, the All-Star break, basically. So it can happen, but I don't know that people are gonna necessarily be looking for that to happen again.
Right, you just don't want to be in that situation,
Mhm,
and it'd be different this year because they're last year the 100% of the goal for the team was to win baseball games. This year that's important, but also important is learning what you have in some of these young players. So all of a sudden, especially if you're not playing well, does Quinn Matthews, does Tink Hence, does JJ
mhm.
Weatherholt, does which of those guys are you pushing up to the big leagues maybe even a little bit sooner than you originally expected to do, because all of a sudden getting a look at them in big league games becomes more valuable than anything else that might be going on.
Or on the flip side, you don't see them, right? We have seen the Cardinals bring up guys trying to plug a hole or try to catch a spark so they can continue to win. But then if they're not trying to win at the major league level, they may say, okay, well, Matthews needs more time at Memphis, so we're going to wait on him, as well. So I think that's going to be interesting too, to see what that development philosophy is like. Is it better to develop them on the major league level and just lose some games, or do you lose some games with replacement level players so they can play and be successful at a lower level?
Yeah, great. And also, something that I push back on a little bit when it comes to kind of this youth movement. I
Mhm,
think the youth movement isn't so much about giving, unproven guys an opportunity. It's about just getting young guys who have been around an opportunity without the threat of going away. I mean, when you
mhm,
let's assume Nolan Arenado's gone for
mhm,
this piece of conversation. So if Nolan Arenado's gone, who's really getting an opportunity that hasn't had an opportunity before. You can look behind the plate with Paez and Herrera, but guess what? Those guys got an opportunity last year. Contreras was injured much of the year. Those guys were on the team. Jordan Walker's been a big leaguer. Nolan Gorman's been a big leaguer. In that scenario, really the only player who gets the opportunity is Thomas Saggese. He's probably the single guy who doesn't have a legitimate big league track record that's going to get more of an opportunity. So I'm not saying it's bad. I think there's value in telling Nolan Gorman, you're going to be in the lineup every day and you're not going to worry about sending you down to AAA or benching you or anything. We're going to see what we have. Same thing with Jordan Walker. But the idea that they're going to sit here and give guys who have never really been in the big leagues or have a very short tenure in the big leagues this huge opportunity, at the moment, the only person is Thomas Saggese. Now, there's guys that are going to be at AAA. We mentioned J.J. Weatherholt, Quinn Matthews, Tink Hence, at some point. Those guys are guys with no major league service time that at some point should get up to the big leagues. But as the season gets started, let's not paint this thing as this big-time youth movement with all these unproven guys. Basically, everybody that's going to be in the lineup has pretty significant major league time, except potentially Saggese. And if Nolan Arenado's on the team, I don't even know if Thomas Saggese is on the team. He might be back at Memphis.
Well, and even if Nolan's gone, it feels like Saggese's got a really good chance of being the bench guy, right? Because you have maybe Donovan playing second, so you can have Nootbaar in the corner, and then Siani or Scott playing center field. So, he's going to get more time than if he wouldn't. But I think that's why, to your point, is why there is that optimism about this team, because there's that track record. You don't have to, dream on all these guys. You just have to say, well, if they can do what they've done in the past or step up to that level, they don't have to do anything that we've never seen before. They just have to, play like they have shown that they can play. Now, whether they will or not, that's obviously up in the air. But I think that's why, like you said, it's not like a whole bunch of green rookies that you're like, this is not going to go well. There's a lot of talent, and I mean, guys like Mason Wynn and Brendan Donovan are kind of the keys to that, offense anyway. The rocks, if you will, it seems like, that they can build on.
And with Donovan, this is why I think trading Arenado is important, because if Arenado's on the roster, then you're probably stuck playing Gorman at second, which puts Donovan in left, and that probably puts Nootbaar in center from an offensive standpoint, unless they just go all in on defense and center field. And then I don't know what it looks like from that point forward. Alec Burleson would be affected negatively at that point because he wouldn't be able to DH as much as you would like him to DH. So even the outfield in many ways is connected to Arenado because of how you're going to use Brendan Donovan. But I really don't think you have to squint very hard to see a scenario where an offense with a Gorman and Walker who take steps forward can outdo an offense last year that had underperforming Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado.
So I think the kicker, at least for me, I just don't know what the pitching staff looks like as much, right? What are you going to get out of Eric Fetty? What do you get out of Miles Michaelis? Is Steven Matz in the rotation? I think if there's a weak spot to the optimism of this team, for me, I think that's where it's at.
I like the top three. I like Sonny Gray, obviously. Eric Fetty, I'm very comfortable with. And even if you go look at his numbers last year, even his overall numbers after becoming a Cardinal were not great. But if I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's a line of delineation where if you look at his numbers from a certain date forward, it was really, really good. And it mimicked the numbers that he had with the White Sox. So I don't totally know why he had the slow start to his time with the Cardinals. He did, and that sticks in the mind of a lot of Cardinals fans. Andre Palante is a huge question mark. Can he repeat what he did in the second half of the season? I'm a big track record guy. Palante does not have a track record. So I would, if he looks even close to what he looked like in the second half of the season, I really like that 1, 2, 3. If he doesn't, I think that comes to where you're at, where you start to have questions. I don't know what to expect out of Miles Michaelis. He's at a 5+ ERA over the last couple of years. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to him, but
Mm.
he talked to Derek Gould a couple weeks ago and talked about trying to put away hitters with 2 strikes and throwing less strikes and things like that. Like, we've heard that before. He
Yeah.
has said almost those exact same words previously, and he didn't really do it. So is there any reason to believe that he can do it this year? Is there any reason to believe that Steven Matz can stay healthy? I think when Matz is healthy, he's fine, but he hasn't shown the ability to stay healthy. You have Michael McGreevy sitting there, and I think the reason that he is not in the rotation, because if tomorrow was opening day, or the next 5 days were the
Mhm.
first 5 days of the season, that clearly the rotation would be Gray, Fetty, Palante, Michaelis, Matz. So right now, McGreevy doesn't really have a spot. I think he earned a spot based off what he did last year. I think you have to get him in there because he's under the category of people that you want to learn about. But also, I don't want them going into spring with 5 starters. They've done that before, essentially, where
Mhm.
5 starters, and you pray that they all stay healthy. Because this as well as anybody, it is a very rare thing to walk out of spring with all 5 starters that you have penciled in actually healthy. So the overwhelming odds are that one of the top 5, if not more, won't be available on opening day, and that's where Michael McGreevy walks through a door.
Yeah, yeah, there's a good chance. Now, we're also hearing, that they're talking about Matthew Liberatore as coming into camp as being ready to start. I'm sure that it's one of those he'll be ready to start, but he can also go back to the bullpen. But I was a little bit surprised because of the success that he had last year. It's a little bit surprising they didn't capitalize on that, but maybe that's just again that development. It doesn't matter as much this year.
Yeah, I think with him, you have to continue to leave the door open for him to eventually become a starter. I don't think this year is the year for that. So I
Mhm.
have no problem with him showing up to camp and him being stretched out. Even as a reliever, he's probably going to be somebody that you want in some longer type situations. So having him a little bit stretched out. But this is the one thing I would say. I think I would assume at some point in spring the decision is going to be made that he's not a starter, that he's a reliever.
Mhm.
And once that decision is made, whether it's 1 week into camp, 2 weeks into camp, 2 weeks before opening day, whenever it is, that's the moment that for 2025, you stop futzing around with him being a starting pitcher
Mhm.
and you just define his role as a reliever and make him a reliever for the entire season because he has been. Man, they have over his
Mhm.
past couple years, whether it's well he may he may pitch out of the bullpen between 2 of his starts, or we don't know when we're going to use him next. They have not defined his role, but when they define his role and he is clearly a relief pitcher, he has been really successful. And one of the keys I think for this team is you lose Andrew Kittredge. And I think there was an overuse last year of Jojo Romero, and that led to his numbers. It kind of took a dip for a month, and then even the strikeout numbers never came all the way back. You really need to have at least 4 guys that you feel comfortable in high leverage in seven,
Mhm.
8, 9. And for much of the year last year, the Cardinals only had 3 in Kittredge, Romero, and Helsley. So this year, Kittredge is gone. You have Romero and Helsley. I think Ryan Fernandez clearly moves into that type of role as well. But you got to have more than those 3 guys. So I'm comfortable with Matthew Liberatore being in a spot like that. There's some other interesting pieces that are around. I think they're going to sign a relief pitcher who's going to be a high leverage type guy. But I'm veering off your question. But the
Mhm.
most important thing here is Liberatore. Okay, stretch him out in spring, mess around with starting as long as you want, but at some point he's going to go to the bullpen, and once he goes to the bullpen, just keep him there and give him that defined role for all season.
Yeah, yeah, I think we've seen the Cardinals go back and forth with him, with others in the past, and it doesn't work very well.
No,
And honestly, I'm trying to think. I'm sure there are some. I'm just not coming off the top of my head, but it feels like once the Cardinals have put them into that relief role, and Liberatore hasn't been there that long, so maybe it'd be a different story. But once they've had some success, like a Ryan Helsley, for instance, they're never going back to that starting spot. So I'd be interested to see if if that actually takes. If Liberatore can come in and show that he can be a starter, or if it's another one of those where I don't want to say humor them. I feel like I remember Trevor Rosenthal. He always wanted to start, and they always kind of said, "Oh, you come, get him ready to start," and then he never did. So I don't know if it's one of those things or not, but I think it's gonna be interesting to see what they do with it.
A high-end starting pitcher is more valuable than even a high-end closer. So,
Mhm.
anytime you look at somebody as having the potential of being a starting pitcher, I think you have to investigate that on a yearly basis. And that's a Jordan Hicks wanted to go be a starter, and he wasn't going to get that opportunity for sure in St. Louis, and it was a mixed bag with him as
Mhm.
a starter for sure. But yeah, Matthew Liberatore may still be a starting pitcher at some point in the future, but let the man go have a full season of success in the bullpen and then build off of that.
We've been talking about Liberatore so long, it feels like he should be like 30 something, doesn't
It
it?
does, you're right.
I mean, but he's still pretty young. So, uh, and yeah, I think we can. I hope that it comes to the point where his name isn't automatically mentioned with Randy Arozarena, because I think that ship has sailed. But he can still be a valuable piece to the Cardinals, even if it's not quite what they thought he's going to be.
Yeah, I don't play that game. Like once a trade is made, a trade is made. I do the
Hmm.
same thing with when you overpay a guy a contract and you give him too much money and then he underperforms the contract, but he still helps your team. He's still an important piece of the team. Like I just throw that stuff to the side. Yeah, somebody got traded for somebody. Okay. Yeah,
Hmm.
somebody signed for X amount of dollars. Okay. And it can have an impact. Like you can say, hey, this guy's accounting for 8% of the total payroll. You need more out of that. And I'm not saying that's not true, but you can really get lost in the mud when you start doing this. Well, this guy has to do this because
Hmm.
he's being paid X amount of dollars or because the organization gave up this for him. Like, just let these guys go be on the roster and perform at the highest level that they possibly can. Yeah, I would apply that to Steven Matz. He's going to make $12.5 million. He'll be one of the higher paid players on the team this year if he is still around and doesn't get traded. And he hasn't lived up to his contract. Okay, but can he help the team win games? If he can, I don't care how much he's getting paid.
Yeah, and we don't talk about the fact that Andre Palante is in here at almost league minimum and producing well beyond that, right? So there are, for all as many people that underperform their contract, there's just as many that overperform, and it kind of evens out at times.
Generally, it does. I would also, I know you're not talking about this, but I would definitely, I'm not real happy with the Cardinals en route to an arbitration hearing over $150,000 with Palante.
Yeah, yeah, I don't get some of this. I mean, all the total of the three that they've got going, and again, when you're talking about you know a development time and trying to lock in young players and see what they have, to go to three arbitration cases for the total of what, a million one, something like that, seems a little bit strange. And you're right, Palante, especially being that close. Do you think they'll actually? I know that they've done file and trial for a while, but I mean, when you look at that, they just about have to settle that, don't they?
I would, man, what a bad look that would be. I think to
Mm,
go in there now, they'd probably win because the system is slanted towards the team, and the arguments are, the Newt Bar argument is that he can't stay on the field.
right.
The Palante argument is that he doesn't have a track record as a
Hmm.
starting pitcher.
Hmm.
So I think if they do end up going to a trial, I think the teams probably win, especially on those two. I would I would find a way to avoid it. And one thing I think about on this is, are they more hesitant to give guys multi-year deals as a way to help clear the deck for Chaim Bloom
Hmm.
because they're just trying to not have too many entanglements. Now that doesn't mean that Chaim Bloom doesn't like a Brendan Donovan, doesn't like a Lars
Right.
Nootbaar, doesn't like an Andre Palante. But is there more to giving guys multi-year deals now than there was in a year where Mo's going to be back in charge? But I mean, you just can't go to an arbitration trial or arbitration hearing over $150,000. You just can't do
No,
that.
no. I mean, even if you're looking at not tying up the roster for Bloom next year, you give him the 1 year deal that buys out this arbitration year, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and settle. I mean, especially that close. It seems weird, and I do think that there's something to that, though, especially when you're looking at there was John Denton kind of reported that the Cardinals. Well, he started reporting that their Cardinals were close, and then he kind of went to the fact that they never actually really talked to Donovan about a multi-year deal. But him and Wynn would seem like, okay, if you look at the Atlanta Braves way of doing things, those are the kind of guys you lock up for 4 or 5 years. And you wonder if that isn't because you've got to one, you got to get Chaim Bloom on that same page, and that kind of takes him away from what he's trying to do now. So do they just leave that for when he's fully in charge?
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm a big believer in the buy out the arbitration years and then get a couple, 2-3 years on the backside at a relatively low number. You overpay a little bit on the front side, but you're going to underpay a lot on the backside.
Right.
That's a really, really smart way to go about things. So if I was running a baseball team, and I'm a radio guy, so I should not be running a baseball team, but if I was running a baseball team, whenever I had the opportunity to do that with a player that I really believed was a big part of the future, I would be doing that as soon as I possibly could.
Yeah. And it isn't something that the Cardinals, of course, I mean, to some degree, the Cardinals at times have had older players come up. So it's a little bit different, but it also feels like, I mean, I don't remember the last time locked up a young guy, through arbitration and everything like that. I mean, they bought out Tommy Edmonds the last couple of years of arbitration, but I guess that's really about all I can think of.
Yeah, and honestly, I remember when they gave him that second year last year.
Mhm.
I said he's not going to be a Cardinal in the second year. They're putting this second year on, and they're going to move him because he really didn't fit on the roster.
Mhm.
He was in center field at some point. Victor Scott was going to get here. They didn't believe in him as a shortstop. We saw that the year before, where in spring all they talked about was he was going to be the shortstop, and then all of a sudden Paul DeYoung is back playing shortstop most days. So with a utility guy like Brendan Donovan on the roster, and I think Donovan's a better hitter than Edman, I just never thought that Edman was long for the Cardinals.
Mhm.
So when they gave him that second year, my initial thought was that second year is going to be used as a way to up his value in a trade.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Thinking at the time, I was like, you're giving him this contract, but from roster standpoint, he's almost like a non-tender candidate at the end of that year instead of that. So, and it obviously worked out for Tommy Edmonds. So,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to argue with that too much.
And he got
Um,
another contract from the Dodgers. Like he had that year, and then they gave him more money, and he's a perfect fit for the Dodgers. And the Cardinals got Eric Fetty for him. And whether
mhm,
Eric Fetty finishes out his contract with the Cardinals or he gets spun off for something else, one of my least favorite things was where people were very critical of the Cardinals for the Edman trade when Edman did what he
mhm,
did in the postseason. That was one of the. I don't know if there
yeah,
has been a thing in the last 2 years that everybody universally agreed was a good trade at the moment
mhm,
for the
mhm.
Cardinals. But at that moment, I think most people thought that was a good move for the Cardinals.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and especially since Tommy Edman hadn't played all year,
Yeah.
and there was at least a semi decent chance he wouldn't play. Obviously he came back, but yeah, I agree. I think that we always do like to a little bit of hindsight, but the Cardinals got what they needed, and just because they faded, it had nothing to do with that trade per se.
No, I mean, other than the fact that Fetty did not really help right at the beginning.
Right, but everybody was doing
Yeah.
everybody was bad there at that point in time, so I don't think you can blame it too much for him. And he didn't even, I mean, he had he struggled a bit, but he didn't have even the blow ups that we'd seen from Michaelis or others over the
Right.
past years. Games that weren't good, but I don't remember anything that just was like, oh, this is terrible.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, um, so. I'll ask your opinion then on two of the position battles that, and I think they're probably depending on the only other position battles are if Nolan's here or not. So, but assuming he's not, behind the plate, Herrera or Pajes, where are you going?
Okay. So clearly Pajes is the better defensive catcher,
Mm,
and clearly Herrera has the better offensive profile. So I know the pitcher. I think it's going to be. I think Pedro's going to get it. Like so. That first off, from a real life, what's actually going to happen standpoint, I expect Pedro to be the guy to get most of the time behind the plate. I think it's going to be. I don't know how much of a timeshare it's going to be. If it's going to be 60-40, 70-30, 4 starts a week versus 2 or 4, whatever. But I think it is going to be Pajes. That being said, if you can turn Herrera into a good enough defensive catcher from a receiving standpoint and from a game calling standpoint, man, you have to give him the opportunity to move into that frontline catcher's role because of what he can do offensively. He is a middle of the order run producing batter. At least he has that potential. But also the other side of this is you got Jimmy Crooks, who's a year away. If that, Crooks, if there's an injury or when there is a catching injury, because catchers always get hurt, when there's a catching injury, we'll probably get to see Jimmy Crooks this year. And then Leonardo Bernal is right behind him. So we can sit here and talk all we want about the long-term implications of trying to make Herrera a better defensive catcher so you can put him in the lineup as the middle of the order guy. But also, if we're being honest about it, he might not be a Cardinal a year from now because they're going to have to trade some catchers. They have so much catching depth right now. They've got 4 guys that are really solid catchers for various reasons. And at some point, they're going to have to move on from 2 of those guys.
Yeah, and they've got a couple others that are lower down that look okay right now. You'll have to wait and see as they progress upwards. But one thing they've been able to do is figure out catching, which is ironic given the problems that they've had the last couple of years in the major leagues with catching, or at least their expectations of it. Having to replace a Hall of Famer makes it a little difficult. So center field then, Michael Ciani or Victor Scott II?
It's probably going to be Ciani, and I would probably I'd like to see them actually play Nootbaar a little bit more out there if they are struggling from an offensive standpoint. And again, this goes back to if Arenado's on the team, then you have to play Nootbaar some in center field. If he's not on the team, then it becomes the question of how often that you want to do that. At some point, Victor Scott's going to be the guy, and I don't know when that's going to be. My feeling is that he could still use a little bit of time at AAA to get there. So my first thought is that Ciani's going to be the guy. What we have to figure out with Ciani is, he went on that really, really good run right before he got injured. The offensive numbers that he put up for about the month leading into the time he got injured, if that's who Michael Ciani is, that's fine. It's not great offensively, but it's pretty darn good. It's a perfectly fine batting average. It's a lot of base hits, but you can live with that. What you can't live with is what he has been outside of that time, and the Cardinals just have not gotten enough offensive production out of their center field spot. I realize they value defense out there, and they should value defense out there, but also I think sometimes we overstate that a little bit. How many plays does Michael Ciani make that Lars Nootbaar does not make? Is it 1 every 3 games, 1 every 4 games, 1 a week, like 2 a week? It's somewhere in there. So you're putting a guy out there in center field who's going to be really, really good, but you're costing yourself for every play in center field that gets made that would not be made by Nootbaar. You're probably sacrificing 15 to 20 plate appearances. Maybe I'm overstating it, but you get the idea of where I'm going there. So you need to find some offense. And that's where if Victor Scott II is ready for the big leagues from a hitting standpoint, he gives you a skill set that you really don't have with his speed and everything he can do. So I am jumping to give Scott the opportunity. I don't think he's going to be ready on opening day. I know how much they value defense, so it's probably going to be Ciani, but you got to look at Nootbaar out there, especially when the team goes into an offensive rut.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, again, if Victor Scott II isn't starting, then he's going to be in Memphis because he doesn't need to be sitting on the bench.
Yeah.
So then, is Nootbaar your backup center fielder? Probably, and how all that works out. But yeah, I think there are interesting things. I just hope that they don't use spring training as their deciding factor. I think we've seen over the last 2 years them get too involved or too enamored with somebody in spring, and it kind of come back to bite them. So I would like to think that they kind of have an idea even before they get into spring.
That's interesting because on the surface level, I don't disagree with what you just said, but I also believe that spring training results do have to matter for something. And it doesn't even have to be in-game results. It can be some
Mhm.
of the stuff they see on the backfield and some of what they're tracking
Yeah.
with computers and things like that. But I do still think that you should be able to go to spring training and win or lose a job based off your performance.
I mean, I can see that. It's just such a small sample size against, again, you're right. They can track a little bit more. And if you're talking about how they're working and what they're seeing, it may be so. But when you look at just, in game and the quality of people that you're facing, I just think about, what happened with Jordan Walker. The first 2 or 3 weeks of spring in 23, he's just tearing it up. But the last couple, he kind of slumped off. And then we saw that, kind of has I don't know that it's been a detriment overall to him, but I don't know that it's helped either.
Yeah, it's and we're at a point with spring where, especially when it comes, and I know there's a difference between pitchers and position players.
Mhm.
I mean, you think about, like, wasn't it Lance Lynn last year who just basically did everything on backfields? We never
Yeah,
actually even saw
yeah.
him in a game. Like, there's just the way that players are using spring training games, I think, is changing. But also, going back to something I said earlier, if the Cardinals are a team that really struggle to get out of the gate like they have been the last 2 years,
Mhm.
have they internally talked about ramping up a little bit quicker, getting guys into games longer, things like that, as a way to maybe be more ready for the start of the regular season? Or do they think it's just sort of fluky that they've had back-to-back slow starts to the season? And I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I do think we are in a transitional period, and a lot of it has to do with and it's going to be even more so. They're going to put shovels in the ground the second that spring training ends, and they're
Mhm.
going to rebuild that complex. And when we come back in 2026, and especially for 2027, there's going to be even more technology and even more infrastructure where that probably lessens the importance of what you actually see in Grapefruit League games.
Yeah. It's also gonna be kind of interesting with this new philosophy, how that impacts spring training, right? I mean, again, in the past, it was, "Oh, Jordan Walker had a good spring, and he can help us win games early, so we need to do that." Whereas now it's like, is this the right place for him? It may not be, and I don't know. I think that I wonder how much, the new regime, to put it in quotes, will have a say on spring training this year.
Yeah, you kind of put that under player development. I mean, there's a lot
Mhm.
of young guys and things. I would assume that, somebody like a Rob Serfolio is in the middle of all the conversations that are going on about spring training planning. It would
Yeah.
shock me if he doesn't have his handprints all over spring training.
Well, you talked about the fact you wanted to ask Ollie these questions about the slow start and all that. When do you head down to Jupiter and get that chance?
The day after the Super Bowl, so that Monday, I think that's the 10th. That is when
Mhm.
I fly down to Jupiter. I believe they report on the 11th and have first full day workout on the 12th, or it might be one day late, maybe one
Yeah.
day off. But it's in that time period that I will get down there, and we'll start rolling. I do about a month down there, and then Tom Ackerman goes down and he does the final 2 weeks. So KMOX has somebody down there the entire time, in addition to our broadcast crew with John and Ricky and Claves.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to hearing everything from there, and then to listening to you throughout the year as you get to talk to everybody after, hopefully, a season that's a little bit more optimistic than the last couple of years.
Yeah, I hope so. And this past year they were in playoff contention for much of the season, especially after they went
Mhm.
on that run starting on Mother's Day. So I think sometimes the revisionist history of the year makes it look like a really bad year. They did underachieve. They did fail because their goal was to be a playoff team, and they were not a playoff team. But there were still some positive things from this past year, and I hope there's more positive things this next year.
Yeah, I have said before, they had a bad first impression and a bad last impression, and so that tends to be what people remember. But the middle section was pretty good, and they did win 83 games. So it was a winning season for however you want to take it. At least it was that. So Matt, I appreciate you joining us. It's been a lot of fun, and next week we've got Katie Wu joining us here. So
She's the
we're
best.
she is pretty darn good. There's no doubt. I have it's a run of guests that I am very proud to have had a little bit of part of sitting down and talking to. So So until next week, for Matt, I'm Daniel. Good night.
It's amazing, Jack. This game of baseball, you could not write. As he comes back out now and takes his thought. You can't write scripts like we see day in and day out, can you?
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and today I'm looking back at the trade that made John Stuper a St. Louis Cardinal less than 4 years before he kept the Cardinals' season alive in the 1982 World Series. On January 25th, 1979, the Cardinals sent minor league infielder Tommy Sant to the Pirates for Stuper, who had just gone 4-8 with a 5.33 ERA for the Class A Charleston Pirates. Perhaps not surprisingly, the trade didn't earn a mention in either the St. Louis Post-Dispatch or the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The scouting report on Stuper said that he lacked smooth mechanics and labored too much. Following the trade, the Cardinals assigned him to Class A St. Petersburg, where he threw primarily in relief while posting a 2.71 ERA. In 1980, he was promoted to Double-A, where the Cardinals adjusted his mechanics, raising his arm angles so he threw more over the top. They also returned him to starting pitcher. That winter, Stuper threw 110 innings in the Mexican League, and the extra work seemed to pay off. In spring training, Stuper impressed the Cardinals coaching staff and was assigned to Triple-A to await an opening in the Major League rotation. Unfortunately, Stuper's extra work also wore him down, and he went just 6-14 with a 4.92 ERA during the regular season. Despite Stuper's struggles, the Cardinals continued to believe in him, particularly pitching coach Hub Kittle. Though Stuper opened the 1982 season in Triple-A, he made his Major League debut on June 1st, pitching 8 innings in a no decision against the Giants. Stuper went on to win 4 of his first 5 decisions, and after he won 3 consecutive starts in September, he entered the postseason with a 9-7 record and a 3.36 ERA. Stuper made 3 starts that postseason. In Game 2 of the NLCS against the Braves, he allowed 3 runs over 6 innings. St. Louis trailed 3-2 when he was lifted for a pinch hitter in the bottom of the 6th, but Ken Oberkfell won the game with an RBI single in the bottom of the 9th. In Game 2 of the World Series, he pitched into the 5th inning before Cecil Cooper chased him from the game with an RBI single that gave Milwaukee a 4-2 lead. Once again, however, the Cardinals rallied to win as Steve Braun drew a bases-loaded walk in the 9th to bring home the winning run. When Stuper took the mound in Game 6, the Cardinals trailed the World Series 3-2. With the season on the line, Stuper pitched around a pair of rain delays, including a 6th-inning delay that lasted 2 hours and 13 minutes. In a complete game effort, Stuper held the Brewers to 1 run on 4 hits. At one point, he retired 15 consecutive Brewers. Quote, "For him to pitch 9 innings was one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen under the circumstances," said teammate and future Hall of Famer Jim Cott. The following day, the Cardinals won Game 7, 6-3 to win the World Series. Stuper enjoyed a strong 1983 season, winning 12 games with a 3.68 ERA. But in spring training 1984, he suffered a shoulder injury and opened the season in Triple-A. When he returned to the majors, he posted a 5.28 ERA in 10 starts. Stuper was optioned to the minors in June, and in September it was announced that he would be the player to be named later in a trade with the Reds. Stuper threw 99 innings for the Reds in 1985, winning 8 games with a 4.55 ERA. That season marked the end of Stuper's major league career. Since 1992, Stuper has served as a manager for Yale University, a post he continues to hold. He is the winningest manager in school history. So that's a quick look at how John Stuper became a Cardinal and played a crucial role in their 1982 World Series championship. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, and go Cards.
Suter from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's a winner. That's a winner. A World Series winner for the Cardinals.